I think in college, I might have been like really excited to be, like, imagine I could be the next Mark Zuckerberg or something like that. And it's like, to think about that now, it seems so dated.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be Mark Zuckerberg now.
Yeah.
I'm Bair from Enigma. Welcome to Decentralize This. Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Decentralize This, presented by Enigma. As I said before, I'm Bair, the head of growth for Enigma, and today I am excited to be speaking to one of my favorite people, Richard Craib. Richard's the founder of Numerai, which is a decentralized hedge fund that has a really interesting model. Individual data scientists around the world compete to build and apply machine learning models to financial data sets, while staking Numerai tokens behind their predictions. The top performers win prizes paid out in Numerai tokens, but they never actually see the raw financial data. It's all encrypted. It's an example of how blockchain, tokens, and privacy technologies are enabling new types of organizations and incentive structures. Now, Richard just announced Erasure, which is an unstoppable decentralized data marketplace that's also powered by Numerai tokens. We're going to talk about how and why Richard started Numerai and Erasure, the importance of protecting data, what other kinds of organizations blockchain and decentralized technologies could enable, and what it's going to take for people to maybe even leave traditional jobs to work for these new types of organizations. Richard's a really smart guy. I learned a lot talking with him, and I hope you do too. And if you want to learn more afterwards, just follow the links in the episode description. And now, without any further introduction, here is Richard Craib.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us on this, the third episode of Decentralize This. It is a pleasure to have you here.
It is good to be here.
Can you start off, like every show, just giving us about 3 or 4 sentences about who you are professionally, personally, and what you're doing right now?
I'm Richard Craib. I'm the founder of Numerai. Numerai is a hedge fund that crowdsources predictions from people around the world. And Numerai created the Numerai token, which we're now decentralizing in a new protocol called Erasure, which is going to be a decentralized data marketplace for predictions.
That sounds super interesting. And as you might know, we brought on Joey Krug in our first episode where he talked about Augur, which is another one of these decentralized prediction platform. And we talked a lot about why these kinds of marketplaces need to be democratized, why they need to be decentralized. And I'm really interested in learning about how Erasure is approaching that same problem. But let's first start with Numerai, because I have a finance background. I was a trader. I worked with quants. I knew about Numerai for a while. It's a really exciting project, but it's not like a lot of other decentralized projects in the space where they're, building their own blockchain or they're doing something like at a protocol level. You had a very different vision for Numerai. So I want to know, why did you decide to start something like Numerai? What made you believe that something like a hedge fund could be crowdsourced and decentralized, or why it should be?
It's very related to my own interests. And so I was a quant creating a machine learning strategy for a $15 billion fund back in South Africa, where I'm from. And at the very same time, I was competing as a data scientist in Kaggle competitions and reading about Ethereum. And so there are a couple of things happening at the same time, I think, which is maybe you can do finance differently. If you're doing machine learning, you don't really need to look at the data. You can give someone just a representation of the data, and they don't have to know what anything means, and they can still do machine learning. And then the blockchain piece was the incentivization. How can you crowdsource predictions if you're kind of crowdsourcing against adversaries in a way? There are people who are going to just try to get lucky or try to make thousands of accounts. But if you can have staking in the middle of that, you can get the incentives right. And so, yeah, I think blockchain and machine learning are just kind of guaranteed to have a huge impact on the hedge fund industry in the next 5 or 10 years. And Numerai has pretty much put itself at the center of that change.
And it's relative to a lot of projects. It's an older project, right? I know older in this space is a really relative term, but when did Numerai start?
Numerai started in December 2015.
Yeah. So before the ICO boom and a lot of these other projects, Enigma also started, 2015. So we're in the same sort of class year, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Ethereum had launched. I think Ethereum had maybe just launched. It was like $1.
Mm-hmm.
And when we announced Numerai, Ethereum was on like $5 or something. So yeah, it's really like we were like thinking about it for a while. And actually, Joey, who you just mentioned, Joey Craib, he was such a big help. He like helped write the Numerai white paper, and it's a little bit because I happened to meet Joey when I first moved to San Francisco. That's a lot what got me thinking about making a token. It's one of the first conversations we had a long time ago. It was like, I wonder if Numerai could have a token.
And now it does.
Now it does.
Yeah.
For 18 months now.
No, it's incredible. It's a very collaborative space. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. But I think there's been so much talk of tribalism in crypto and all these competing in quotes projects that we forget how much we all build on each other's work. And how much we rely on our peers in the space for understanding these really difficult problems. It's not solved.
Yeah, and I hope it's as easy as it was to connect with people who can help you. Because I remember back then it was like very easy to meet with Joey, and I remember Joey was like, "Oh, you should talk to Vitalik," and I just like got on Skype and talked to Vitalik, and it's just like this very, very like friendly industry compared to the hedge fund industry.
I mean, if it's still that friendly, I'm sure we could get Vitalik on this podcast too. So I'll just shoot him. I'll shoot him a Twitter message and I'll ask him for some ETH, and then we'll get him on here. I'm sure.
I don't think he gives away ETH. I'm not sure. He might.
Oh no! Well,
he gives it away on his Twitter all the time. You can check.
That was going to be my angle. Oh well. We'll try something else, I guess then. But yeah, so Numerai now, so it started in 2015. It's come a long way. So now Erasure, right? And we'll get to talk about Numerai again, because I've got some more questions about the platform. And as you mentioned, the way that incentives are aligned on the platform and how the token is used. That's really interesting to me, that applications of blockchain technology are not just the blockchain itself, but how it can create new kinds of organizations. I definitely want to talk to you about that. But first, Erasure, because that's new. You just announced this, right?
Yeah, we announced it a couple days ago, 3 days ago or something. Yeah.
But you didn't come up with it 3 days ago. So how long have you been thinking about Erasure? What is Erasure? And how does it relate to Numerai?
We've been thinking about it for a very long time. Actually, yeah, after the day of the launch of Numerai, I happened to meet with Fred Ursum, who's also a friend of mine and one of these great people in the community. And he came to my house to kind of like talk about Numerai. And we ended up sitting in the hot tub of my apartment and talking about the future. And he basically had always told me since he first met me, talking about Numerai before it even launched, he's like, you can't just crowdsource the models. The machine learning part is what Numerai has been able to do, crowdsourcing models. But you need to be able to crowdsource data, and you need to get people to be able to come and give you their own data. And I thought about that for a second, and I was like, that's a terrible idea. Like if we ask people to just email us, data that they think is good for the stock market, it will be like a total mess. You'd get people uploading all kinds of junk. But what if you let people upload data and they had to attach a stake to it? Mm-hmm. And we could burn that stake if the data was bad. And that was the beginning of thinking about Erasure. And in fact, I wrote a draft white paper for Erasure over a year ago, but we just decided to hang back and wait until we were closer to being able to actually develop it and deploy it.
That's amazing. So Erasure is closer to reality now than ever. So why is that? Why is this the right time, do you think? Why is this like what the decentralization space needs right now, as opposed to maybe like when Numerai was launching?
I think it was, people were very confused about blockchain, and there was not much of an understanding about how kind of simple and elegant it is. It's not really like staking, it's such a simple thing, and it seems almost like you don't even need a blockchain. If you have to stake money, why don't you just send the money by PayPal, and then PayPal holds it or something, or like why don't you just use escrow services? Or there's all these kind of like questions that are like very good questions if you're just learning about it for the first time. And so people were just learning about the fact that companies can have tokens, or so people didn't. I don't think they were quite ready for hearing about Erasure, especially because we hadn't yet shown that it works for Numerai. And now we've had almost 18 months or 15 months or something like that of staking of NMR. It's been staked 17,000 times on like millions of predictions. So it's sort of like guaranteed to work now, Erasure, like because Numerai is kind of running on the Erasure protocol. It was just the very first version of it. So I like the timing now. I think people can easily get their heads around it, and people in the finance industry really like it. Numerai users really like it, and other hedge funds like it. So I think it's going to be awesome.
So what are you doing to help people wrap their heads around Erasure now? Because if you're very familiar with the space, or maybe you've worked at a hedge fund for a long time or things like that, it makes it easier to grasp these kinds of emerging technologies. But let's say you're somebody who's not as familiar with the space, but you believe that there's a future for decentralized technologies and decentralized organizations. How do you make sure that you're making that message and that technology still accessible for those people while still growing this core community of people who are, staking the token, providing their own data, participating in Numerai?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very difficult. And I do see communication as a very big part of what my job is. Numerai's made tons of like videos that people really like, to try to explain things to people who've never heard it who are hearing it for the first time. But to get to the heart of the matter, and the heart of the matter is like we're making economic incentives. And if you can understand economics, that's all you need to understand what Numerai is doing and what Erasure is doing.
Does anybody really understand economics?
I think there are nice self-contained parts of microeconomics that people understand. Maybe macro is a bit of another story.
That's a fair point. So I was a economics, game theory, auction theory concentrator in my undergrad years. And I remember looking at a lot of these open problems in game theory and being like, oh, if only there was a cool way to apply this. And that's how I ended up in trading. But if blockchain had been a thing, right? If tokenization had been a thing, maybe that's where I would have been dragged into. Instead, I had to slog through this other field of derivatives market making and high frequency trading. And now, if only I could have just gone on Numerai,
Yeah, right. I also think, in a way, if I were starting Numerai now, I would just be an Erasure user. You know what I mean? It's like way better than starting your own hedge fund. You just sell the predictions on Erasure, because then you can focus on the core thing, which is like making the alpha. And you can sell the predictions to other hedge funds who can maximize the usage of your predictions. And I like that that's what's happening now. There's like all these different things that, when faced with the choice when did I graduate? Like 2012. It's really, this whole space is there's so many interesting things to do. And it just cuts right through all of the old barriers that have been created. So especially in things like finance. So I think it's going to be a very interesting future.
Let's talk about some of those barriers for a second, because I have this open question of how are we going to convince more developers, but, also like non-developers, to forego these sort of steady high income jobs. And two of the most lucrative jobs right now, as they've been for a while, are, software development or quantitative trader. How do we convince people to maybe not go down these traditional paths and maybe embrace something that's a little more speculative in terms of not in terms of the value, because we know what the value of these technologies can be, but it's speculative in the sense that we don't know exactly what the future looks like yet. We're still very early on in building it. You say that communication is important. How can we be communicating better to people so that they maybe don't just do these traditional career paths and they think about building things like Numerai or Erasure or Enigma?
Yeah, I think definitely Ethereum's like branding and messaging was so unusual when it came out. That was so compelling. The kinds of conversations that it started changed the way I thought about things. Like, I think in college, I might have been like really excited to be, like, imagine I could be the next Mark Zuckerberg or something like that. And it's like, to think about that now, it seems so dated.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be Mark Zuckerberg now.
Yeah. Like starting a social network or something. It's like a bygone era. And the idea of kind of getting to the core problems, and even the focus on welfare, like all the discussions about, like the Radical Markets book, or people trying to think, can we do capitalism slightly differently with different incentives? I think that's very compelling for a lot of smart people. And so I see a lot of young people getting interested in blockchain, even though I thought they were all interested because the price of Ethereum was going up, but a lot of them are still interested.
Yeah, it's one of those economic incentives though, right? As long as there's a secondary market for a token, it has some speculative value. And I think we get into trouble when people start to conflate the speculative value of something with the tangible value of something. That's why it's really cool that, with Numerai, you've got this incredible amount of staking already active. So
it is nice to be used when and for such a long time, when there's so much skepticism and so many things that have kind of broken down since the ICO mania. We didn't do an ICO, we gave the token away, and those people used it immediately. Some have used it every single week for like over a year. So it's really nice to have that. And I was just at Ethereum San Francisco conference yesterday, and a lot of people came up to me and like, yeah, it's so nice to see something that's being used, something practical. And people say that they use NMR as like an example of token that kind of got things right. So that's really nice, because it was quite a tough decision in a way. Well, it was an easy decision in the end, but it was an interesting decision for us to think about, should we do an ICO or not? And not doing it has had some large benefits.
So it's interesting because there's the token, which has immediate utility today. There's Numerai, which is already an active platform. There's Erasure, which is just starting. These are all things that are possible today with the technologies that have been created, and they'll get better over time. And then we also have a lot of focus on emerging decentralized technologies that are in like a very unsolved space. Whether it's privacy or whether it's scalability solutions or some of these other like major technical barriers, we can already see like if we can solve some of these basic issues with decentralized technologies, it also unlocks a whole host of other applications. I'm wondering, what do you see as like the biggest technical barrier right now to the adoption or the success of decentralized technologies?
I don't know. I think on the one hand, I'm not even sure to what extent consumers will use blockchains or need to.
End users.
Yeah. And I think that Numerai's example of this very niche user base, very technical already because they're all data scientists,
right?
And very specific application in finance. I think there'll be a lot of those. But I'm particularly interested in applications that can kind of like, you can see how they would work today. And so I don't know too much actually about like the the 5-year technical challenges for the Ethereum blockchain itself, for example. But I like that you can do a lot with some small things like staking.
Right.
You can get a lot of different behavior coming out, and it's not interesting in a kind of technical basis in a way. It's just like, oh, there's a stake of tokens in the blockchain, but it's really the emergent economic properties, and there are different kinds of commerce that it can enable, different kinds of companies that you could have never had before. That's what gets me excited.
Great segue. I have a tweet of yours pulled up here. I'm going to read it. It says, "Why are people porting consumer internet ideas from 2007 to blockchains? Ideas like WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchat are almost not even technology. They're UIs. I think," this is you, not me, I'm just repeating your words, "I think blockchains should be used to make companies that couldn't exist in any form in 2007. So, you've said this before. It sounds good to me. Let's talk through maybe some examples of these types of companies that couldn't exist in 2007, but decentralized tech, whether it's, blockchains themselves or these kinds of staking models or anything that's enabled by decentralization. What besides what you're working on do you think could be an example of this?
It's quite interesting. It's quite hard to be creative, I don't know, as a rule. But in terms of companies, like you see the companies around you and you think, well, I wonder how you could do these companies differently. Mm-hmm. But one way I like to think about making it something on the blockchain is what companies work perfectly fine in the real world, but you can't make like an internet version of them. And what strange behaviors make sense in the real world but never happen online. And one of the examples I can think of is like tipping. Like, if you go into a restaurant, there's like a 95% chance you'll leave a tip with a waitress. And on the internet, if there was a website that said, please leave a tip after you use this website, mm-hmm. What do you think the percent will be? Like 0, like very close to 0. And so that's like a weird difference. And that's just like, there's no reason. It's just like something in human behavior and like the social contract of entering a restaurant versus like the social contract of visiting a website. Mm-hmm. It's just something that we've imagined is different about those two things. Yeah. But imagine if you had a website maybe where everyone had to stake tokens. And then like people like destroyed stakes if you didn't tip or something like that. Then you can suddenly have like a restaurant on the blockchain.
Interesting.
Not to extend the metaphor too far, but you can basically think about that. And I think the same is true for hedge fund industry. In a hedge fund, you have all these people and they come to work and you have employment contracts and you have these like, you have to be careful who you talk about the strategy with and you have all these like rules. Mm-hmm. And, but you can't really take that idea and stick it on the internet because all the kind of social contracts and legal contracts required to make a hedge fund kind of force everybody to sit in one room.
Yep.
But with staking and blockchains, you can actually make a hedge fund that is like the internet hedge fund, where the token is somehow kind of like aligning everybody to do the right thing and make something that you couldn't otherwise do. So that's, I think, a nice analogy for how people can think about these new applications.
So I think at Enigma we see things sort of similarly, maybe sort of differently, because I do the same thing where I'm like, what's something that it's already out there in the real world? But I take something like Uber, and I'm like, Uber works to some extent because it's connecting you with a driver. It functions as a marketplace between the driver and the passenger. You get from point A to point B. On its face as a product, it certainly works. On another level, from the perspective of protecting consumer data, it fails horribly. And when I think about decentralization, I don't just think about, like how can we create new types of organizations that couldn't exist? I think about how do we create new, healthier, more sustainable, I think that word sustainability is key, more sustainable types of organizations and enterprises. And here I think we start to overlap a little bit because I think part of the innovation that you guys have is that you're able to have these competitions. You're able to have this collection of data scientists and they're not seeing the raw data, right? on Numerai.
Yeah.
I think that in itself is a solution that, in tandem with these staking technologies, is what makes Numerai work, is what makes it so powerful. And if you had to expose all of that raw data, maybe it's not even a viable type of organization at all.
Exactly. That's definitely an important part of it. So if we gave away all of our data in raw form, people could run off and start their own hedge funds with it. And the neat thing about machine learning is you can do machine learning on data even if you don't really know what you're modeling. Mm-hmm. And so we give out a form of our data that's totally obfuscated that people can model, but so they're able to contribute value to us without us giving away all of our valuable data to them. And so that was the first kind of trick about Numerai. Like, how do you solve crowdsourcing? Number one, you need people to be able to work on it. Well, if people are going to work on it, they have to see it, and then they're going to just run off with the data. Okay, so that's why you have to have some kind of technology for obfuscating data. And then the next thing is, if people have no skin in the game, if they don't really care whether the hedge fund goes up or down, or I live or die, then they're not going to be too incentivized to produce really good work. So if you allow them to stake a token, then the incentives align really nicely.
No, it makes total sense to me. Obviously, I think about this kind of stuff a lot, and it seems like if we can combine all these different types of solutions, I think that blockchain is becoming better understood, right, than when you were starting Numerai originally, or when Ethereum was launching. We have a better understanding of its strengths and limitations now. But what's in the public conversation now a lot more than maybe blockchain is this issue of the privacy of data. Far from like just using it to enable new types of organizations, but just like people are being cognizant, like this is why we don't want to be Mark Zuckerberg anymore, right? People no longer want to be associated with organizations that don't treat data the right way, that can't protect this data. What's your take on just the social movement that's happening right now with respect to data privacy? Do you think that this is something that's worth focusing on? Do you see it as critical as the media might be making it out to be?
Yeah, well, to quickly mention about Numerai, we give out this data set that's encrypted or obfuscated, and users model it. It doesn't just allow Numerai to protect our data. It means we never have to see our users' models because they only give us predictions, and so they can keep their models. And I think if we were to change to be like, hey, we need everybody to actually give us all of your code, and you have to use certain kinds of languages and certain kinds of libraries, then suddenly the whole fun of it kind of goes away. Right. And I do think you're right. That is like something in society that's happening where people are getting just more and more uncomfortable using things where they have to give all their value away. So it's nice when no one has to give any value away, and instead they can be bound by a nice economic relationship that they both want to be in, versus like being trapped in some central system that you can't escape.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of not being able to escape things. It makes me feel very claustrophobic. But that's what I think decentralization as it's hard to call it a movement because there are so many different perspectives and incentives in a space like this. But generally, it's all moving in this direction of the redistribution of power. Maybe people. Like in Numerai, it's the data scientists themselves having control of their own models, not needing to give the model away. And as you said, having skin in the game. Having skin in the game is a power. It's a risk, but it comes with a reward. And I think that's sort of self-actualization that's possible with a platform like Numerai is really important and gives people maybe a dignity that they don't necessarily have with centralized platforms and centralized organizations.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the power of a Numerai user, for example, they can just quit. They can just stop using it. They can be like, I don't like this, and I'm gonna stop. And we don't have anything of theirs when they leave. It's like, but if I quit Facebook, it's sort of like, well, I still, it's a whole different thing. All my data was basically licensed to Facebook the whole period I was using it, and they could do kind of whatever they wanted and run any ads next to my pictures and stuff. It's weird. It is a weird.
They can monetize your ghost. It's very strange.
Yeah, it's weird we got this far with them.
I don't think they gave us much choice.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing, choice. I do want to talk to you about, is there a value to having some of these platforms be centralized instead of decentralized? If you give people the choice of being able to, take their ball and go home, right? Pull their stake, leave the platform. There's something to be said for some platforms, for some models where you do want people to be kind of bought in and aligned for the long term. If you're running a traditional organization, there's benefits to having it be hard to leave the organization or hard to fire somebody. You want there to be continuity, you want there to be institutional memory and so on. How do you see decentralized organizations or platforms handling that problem? Are there times when, we would be better off having a little more stickiness to things? Or, and if there are, how can we, building these decentralized platforms, be aware of that and build solutions that, properly incentivize people to actually stick around?
Great question. I think, more, if you have more free exit, it's better. Then anyone who's really there really wants to be there. Anyone who holds NMR, it's because they want to, right? They could always just sell it. And at any time that's true. So it's very different to other services. And so I think, the more you have the ability the more you have it be the case that anybody who's in the system wants to be there, it's better. Because I think if you ran, say, a survey on Facebook, and I think they run these surveys, it's like, if Facebook, you're using it 30 times a day, and Facebook asks you, do you like using Facebook? And you immediately say no. It's like, what's going on? It's like, there's something wrong. There's something about it's sort of valuable to you, but in a kind of weird, like you're trapped kind of way.
There's switching costs.
And so, you'd prefer to be like, you said yes every single time you used it. It wasn't because you just felt addicted. It was because you felt like it was this mutually beneficial thing for you and the network,
right,
for you to be there. So that's much better.
So it does create a complication if you're designing these platforms, knowing that, if there might be lower switching costs, let's leave staking aside for a second, but, the idea that it's decentralized, that it's like, if you stop participating in Numerai, and you can, you could in theory go to like some kind of like competing platform, and there wouldn't be as high of a switching cost as if you like had signed a non-compete with a traditional hedge fund, and now you're going off and working at a competitor. It's a very different type of industry that you're creating. So what do you see as the future for this? It's a weird question because I'm asking you, like, is Numerai anticipating having like competing other Numerais, or do you think that it's natural in a decentralized industry like this that Numerai would actually grow to dominate as a platform, so that like all decentralized hedge funds kind of run themselves through Numerai? Does the question make sense?
Yeah. Well, the first part, I mean, if you do have a system where everybody can exit, and we don't have any of our users' models, so if no users come back to Numerai this week, we will not be able to trade. Our hedge fund will be over. Like, we need our people to come back. And so because that's this constant tension, and our users have this legitimate bargaining power of being able to not come back, it's almost like it forces us to improve. Right. And if we did have, instead every single day we sent an email to our users that said, by the way, if you leave and join another hedge fund, we're going to sue you. We're going to put you in jail. there's a whole different spirit to that. And that's really what other hedge funds are like to work at. Big hedge funds that you've heard of, they have put former employees in jail. It's crazy. It must be so tense to work there.
I was on a non-compete for about a year.
Yeah. Wow. So that's I don't really like that. And I do think that staking is a way out of that. But did you have a broader question there?
You're leading me to maybe a more important one, which is, now we're getting into like the use of the legal system as an aligning factor historically versus something like you're saying where you're building economic incentives into the platform. And we're starting to come into the stage of this industry where there's established institutions and established rules and regulations. And we have this technology that's very immature that not a lot of people understand. And we're trying to use rules from 1930 and sort of like backfit them, retrofit them onto the emerging technologies of today. And it's creating all kinds of havoc. So what do you think about, I asked you before about the technical barriers to the adoption and growth of platforms like Numerai and other decentralized technologies. What do you think about other barriers like political and social and these legal barriers? Like, what do you see as being like the biggest non-technical barriers to adoption?
I think the legal position in the United States for being a blockchain entrepreneur here, it's not a friendly place for blockchain, and it's strange. It's strange to operate in an environment like that, and I think that is a big. It's really slowing things down. It's also hard to sympathize when it's hard to sympathize when the regulations are kind of around things that are like have really actually become like things like Zcash, privacy stuff. Like we can't turn back the clock and not do that. And there are going to be privacy coins like that forever. And so I do think once something like that has happened, where there's this technology that's created that's not going away, the law needs to actually try to work with the technology, not really the other way around at that point, because it's out there, and so and there's no one in charge of it, and so. But then on the other hand, I do think there's some, especially when it comes to fundraising, ICOs, and things like that. I think there could be good guidelines for that. And I think all the good entrepreneurs would follow those guidelines, and it would be very easy to go after the people who don't. But right now it's just like, it's more like the guidelines are very, very light, and it's almost like anybody could be bullied by the regulators at any time. I was reading about Eric Voorhees' stuff. I mean, the Shapeshift guy. Like, he's such a nice guy. He's like the best. His friend was put in jail, Charlie Shrem, and he's just been like fighting for like the most sane stuff, like the most careful, well thought out things. And his products are used and people like them, and it's so simple. And now it's just like this weird like regulation pressure that's pushing his company around. I feel like something's wrong with that.
It's a challenging environment, being in the US myself, and just wanting more clarity, and at the same time wanting to build things that can be used today, not wanting to just sort of wait and see what happens. There's problems that need to be solved today, not just in the decentralization space, but like you're seeing, like you're trying to solve a problem that already exists in the financial world. We're trying to create new value.
Yeah.
And it can be frustrating when people slow that down because they haven't figured out how to already. I can see them trying to reduce the value that's being created out of the need for protecting some subsection of consumers. It's important, but I see it less maybe as like this is a regulatory challenge, but more of like this is an education challenge. if we really want to protect consumers, at the end of the day, what we really need to be doing is teaching them about these technologies and teaching them about the platforms that exist that utilize these technologies and getting them hands-on with all of these platforms. To me, that would make more sense.
Yeah, I think that's right. But it is a complicated issue. I can see the reasons to try to protect people, but I must say I'm really glad that no government protected me from investing in Ethereum and Augur and Polychain. I mean, I'm glad no one could stop me from doing that, because I thought I'd done enough research. I didn't know that much at the time of those investments, but I felt like I'd made a good assessment of the risk, and for it to be impossible and harder for people to be able to invest in things. I see it as a very big problem, but I'm not quite sure the solution. I wouldn't know what, if I were in charge of the SEC, I'm not sure what I would do. And maybe that's why they're not doing anything.
Well, you don't have to be prescriptive. Your job is to build what you build and to make it work for the most number of people, just operating on the information that you have and trying to do the right thing. It's about all that anybody could ask you to do at this point. And I think you've done a very admirable job. So
thanks.
We've talked about a lot of things. I want to close with maybe a tone of optimism rather than a tone of frustration, but there has to be, beyond what you're doing at Numerai and with Erasure, there have to be like really good signs that you're seeing, right? Like there's been this market correction, but when I have conversations, I hear a lot of optimism from developers who see the rate at which, development pace is increasing, interest in the space from people who have traditionally been developing at large organizations, whether it's Google, Facebook, or whomever. They're starting to come around. People are starting to figure it out, and the prices won't reflect that, but adoption will. Where do you get the most hope from? What is giving you the most hope right now in the future of all of these technologies and platforms?
I kind of thought going into this year it would be great if the focus shifted from prices and to usage, and
Wish
people
granted.
started. Yeah, I think that happened. And there are a lot of people who are now really trying to understand how they can use the tokens they bought, even if it's just to experiment, because that would be great too. And probably more people using MetaMask and things like that than ever. And I know also from trying to hire people, it seems like blockchain engineers are still in higher demand than ever. Which you would think maybe that would have come down a lot in a market correction, but that hasn't happened. So there's a lot of signs for optimism. And the other thing is just the sort of, I've always found most exciting about blockchain is like, it's so hard to imagine what will happen next, and how even a few simple things could just kind of totally invert or change how everything's currently done. Like, I don't know that, like, the moment we launch Erasure on mainnet, like, what will be the first 2 days that, I have no idea. It could immediately be used in all these different contexts for something we didn't even envisage. So I think it's like, that's what's the most exciting thing. And the idea of DAOs, and there's so many things we haven't even seen that were contemplated a few years ago that are going to happen, and in very unusual ways. My feeling is it's going to be a lot about finance and incentives. But we'll see.
We will see. Can you imagine working in any other industry right now?
Well, I have to try to like stay abreast of machine learning research, stay abreast of quantitative finance research, and blockchain. And I must say, blockchain's kind of like took over my mind. But I'm hoping to free up some of my mind for the rest of it as well. But I do really like it. And I think people, it's so interesting how kind of when people get it, there's something magical about it. that like clicks in people's brains, even more so than I think when people first learned about the internet. There's just something so strange and interesting about it, that it's like sucking in all these smart people with the weirdest ideas.
Well, my hope is that after people listen to this episode with you today, that they have that same light going on in their heads and in their eyes, and they get a little more excited about all these platforms that are being created. I hope that they look into Erasure. I've looked into it. It seems so cool. I can't wait to see what people do with it. I'm sure you'll be publishing a lot more. I'm going to add links underneath the episode description so people can learn more about Numerai, about you, about Erasure. And if people have any questions for you, what's the best way for them to like get in contact with the Numerai Erasure team or tweet at you or anything like that? Is that cool? Do you respond to tweets? What do you do?
Yeah, tweeting at me is good. That would be great. I'm at Richard Craib. Nice.
Yeah, we had Ryan Selkis on in the last episode, and he embraces Twitter very much. I think we have a lot of prolific tweeters.
Funny.
He's a really funny guy. He's a good tweeter. I try to model myself after him, but I think I tweet about 100th as much, so there's always room for improvement, I suppose.
find it hard to tweet a lot. I almost don't have enough ideas on a daily basis. I'm always amazed, like these really rich, powerful, philosophical tweets. Then people do like 10 of them per day. It's like, where did you get these ideas?
Well, there you go. Twitter is a great place for philosophical insight and free ether.
Yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on Decentralize This. It was a pleasure to have you, and I look forward to talking more with you soon.
Thanks a lot, Tor.
If you want to learn more about Enigma, you can visit us at www.enigma.co. You can go to our blog at blog.enigma.co. You can join our Telegram group at t.me/Enigma Project. If you're curious about anything we talked about in the podcast today, make sure you follow the links below in the episode description. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Medium so you don't miss our next awesome episode and interview. Otherwise, thank you for listening. We hope to see you next time on Decentralize This. I'm Bair. Have a great day.